Hello, this is Bill Fetter of Unfettered Marketing, and this is a presentation that I did at Pardot in 2020, Wednesday, December 9th of 2020, and it's called Cool Handlebar Merge Language Tricks. Now, I've re-recorded this session because the original sessions were kind of short and I really had to rush through things. So this is an opportunity for me to slow down a little bit, make sure I've explained everything well, and also I've added a couple of bonus pieces of content that I didn't have in the original presentation. So watch for those of you who watched it in the first place. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about first what's Handlebar Merge Language anyway, why use it, and then we're going to go over the basic fields and the patterns that comprise it, and then I'm going to give you 5 cool tricks and a bunch of riffs on those tricks for how to use it. So what is Handlebar Merge Language in the first place? Well, first of all, it replaces the % merge field nomenclature in Pardot with the curly brackets. So you're replacing all of those symbols with the curly bracket symbols. Now, Pardot has a very nice feature in this, in that when you update to Handlebar Merge Language, it actually will update your email templates when you are editing them. And it also is nice that the old merge language will continue to work after you've upgraded. So there's really not much downside in order to upgrade. Now, like many things in Pardot, there's a banner that will show across your screen that says, streamline your tailored marketing content across Salesforce, get started, update to the Handlebar Merge Language. So you've got to go through that process for updating your account in order to enable the Handlebar Merge Language in the first place. And I had asked a poll in the original presentation of how many people had actually done this, and I was kind of surprised to find that there was over a quarter of the people in the presentation who hadn't actually done this yet. Now, this feature has been available for over a year now, so I really encourage you to, after you've gone through this presentation and found all the neat things that you can do with Handlebar Merge Language, to go ahead and do the upgrade to your account. There's really not much downside. You have to make sure that when you're editing an email that was built under the old system, that all those things are upgraded. But it generally goes through and updates all those things for you anyway. So there's really not a whole lot of pain in doing this upgrade. So why do we use merged language? Well, first of all, it's nice to feel special, right? Except in situations like this where it says, not provided your feedback is important to us, instead of the actual name. Now, this is an actual email that one of my clients got from the company behind QuickBooks. It's a little bit funny to see this. The lesson here is that, and it's something you're going to have to learn with Handlebar Merge Language, it's make the blank blank. Don't use placeholder data for when you really mean nothing. So don't put in not provided. Don't put in nothing when you mean blank. It would have been fine if this just said, hello, your feedback is important to us, if that field were blank. So that's one really important principle to remember with Handlebar Merge Language, especially when we start talking about the conditionality in here. Basically, Handlebar Merge Language is a yes-null question. It's a basic form of dynamic content. This is available to all levels of Pardot accounts. Even if you have the basic Pardot account that doesn't include dynamic content, you have this kind of dynamic content available because you can put in if-else statements to show content or not show content, or show content or show different content. So there's all kinds of things you can do with this. And sure, Handlebar Merge Language is just like the old merge tags where you can say hello to a friend by their first name, but there's much, much more to it than that. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out, and I did this so you don't have to, I wanted to make sure and I understood what the field comparison was between the old and the new language, because there are some slight differences and a few new things. So the first thing is what's new. The address 1 and address 2 fields are now combined. There is only an address field for the new Handlebar Merge Language. So if you have two things on the address 1, address 2 field, now it's combined. You also have some options for the current day, current month, and current year. And a couple of fields that are not in the new merge language is you don't have account description anymore. Although if you wanted to put it in, you could create it as a custom field, I guess. Also, the HTML signature on Pardot is no longer part of the Handlebar merge language. Now we're going to talk about how you get around that and what you can do with it instead using the signature blocks that are available in Salesforce. And I think this is probably part of the aspect of moving to the new login requirements for Pardot, which means that the old login and the old profiles are gradually going away in favor of Salesforce. So I have a feeling that HTML signature block being dropped has to do with that. So as far as the field comparison goes, you don't have to try and read this slide. I have put on the bottom of this page in a document that includes the slides from this presentation. I've also included a spreadsheet which shows you side by side what the old fields were called and what the new fields are called, so you don't have to try and read this off the screen. Okay, what does Handlebar merge language offer you? Well, one thing that's really great is that it offers you more dynamic customization available. There's a limit of 200 merge fields on an email. Now, I'm not sure I've ever seen an email with that many merge fields in it. But you can see that you have 200 Handlebar merge language fields available on an email where you only have 10 pieces of dynamic content available if you were going to combine the two. So it actually offers you more opportunities to dynamically customize an email based on the new options that you have with logic with Handlebar merge languages. So this is a very simple form of logic. It's basically if-else. It's basically if the merge field has data in it, then it displays some statement. Else, if it doesn't, show something else. And that's why I said it's super important to not use placeholder data if you want to use a Handlebar merge. You want that data to either be populated or not populated, because this logic is based on, is there something in that field or is there not something in that field? It's very binary. It's there's something or there's nothing. So you might ask, what kinds of fields can I use for Handlebar merge? So based on my look at it, here's what I would recommend. Absolutely use text fields, number fields, drop downs are fine, dates, text areas are fine. Now, I also say don't use, or use with great caution, checkboxes and radio buttons for this particular reason. If you've got those fields synced with Salesforce, the null condition of a checkbox or radio button is actually called blank. So once that field syncs with Salesforce, it's called blank, not empty. So it works before there's a sync with that record with Salesforce, but once it's synced with Salesforce, Salesforce is going to call the null condition blank. So it doesn't really work in that case. You can use it if the field is not synced, because by default you can use Pardot. Basically, it either has the value or it's nothing. But again, be very careful with checkboxes and radio fields, especially if somebody decides later, hey, I'm going to sync this thing, because it could affect Handlebar merge you're using. Displaying multiple responses, that doesn't really work. And then using default field values, you've got to be careful with as well, because the default field value, if you set that as part of your field, then that's going to take the place of null, so you can't really use the logic portion of Handlebar merge if you set a default field value for a particular field. So those are the caveats in terms of what you can use and what you shouldn't use. This question came up in the presentation. Does it work in Classic and Lightning? The answer is yes. No problems either way. One thing I wanted to make clear about how this pattern works is that you can show multiple merge fields with or without the merge field that triggers the condition. So you can put in the merge field to trigger the condition, and then you can include the same merge field and other merge fields if true, or else show a third merge field if the original merge field is blank. So you can put anything you want in the two conditions there. You can use the merge field that triggers it, or you don't have to. It's completely up to you. So that's another piece of flexibility that this has that's very nice. So here's an example of showing multiple merge fields in a condition. And this one is a good one because, for example, if your recipient has an account number, for example, then you could show their sales rep's name. So that might be the account owner in this case. So your sales rep is the owner name, the owner phone, the owner email. If there's not an account number, then you could take some other condition like, would you like to schedule a call? Click here. Maybe we're trying to get this person to engage with sales. So there's an example of if they're a customer, show one thing. If they're not a customer, show something else. Now, what I wanted to point out here with the recipient owner name, owner phone, owner email, those are Salesforce account fields. So they're the fields that are on someone's user account in Salesforce, which is why it's really important, and a lot of times salespeople are bad about this, putting correct information on that Salesforce user account, because you can use those as merge fields in Pardot. And if they're not there, if they're blank, then you get nothing, which isn't so good. So one thing I suggest, do an audit of your users. You might need an admin to pull this kind of a report, but do an audit of your users for all of the fields associated with the user account. So the user email, the user name, the user phone number in particular, address, that kind of stuff. Make sure that you do an audit for anybody that you want to use this for. Make sure they actually have that information populated and if the information seems consistent. So this might be some area where you need to kind of get on top of your salespeople to update their user accounts, because you're going to use that information in merge fields. So here's cool HML trick number 1. The prospect resubscribe when you're using form handlers and operational emails. Now, here's another thing where I did a poll to find out how many people had actually enabled prospect resubscribe, another relatively new feature that became available when Handlebar Merge Language was launched. And I was surprised, in fact, to find that almost 2/3 of people had not enabled this feature. Now, what is prospect resubscribe, I guess is what we have to go over at this point, and how do you enable it? So it's a little bit tricky as to where it is in the system and how to enable it. So before we get into that, what I'm going to mention first is you need to have an email ready at the ready before you enable this feature, because you have to have an email that gets launched when someone resubscribes. So you have to pick an email template that you're going to use for this. And essentially that email template is, hey, you push the resubscribe button, here's the link to click to resubscribe. It's a way to make sure that the resubscribe goes to actually the person that's resubscribing and that they're actually opting back in. So I'm going to show you here how to enable this actually in your Pardot account. All right, so here's our Pardot screen for this settings page. And if you scroll down, you see there's nothing on here about prospect resubscribe. It's hidden. You have to open up the account information with the edit button, and now you go down and you see the prospect resubscribe option available at the bottom. Open this up. If it's not enabled, you're going to see an empty checkbox like this. If you push that button, it's going to enable, and you're going to get this option here to ask if you want to continue with the current sync behavior. This is just a warning with respect to how opting back in works if it's connected with Salesforce. So read that, make sure you understand what that means. But now that when you go back down here, it's asking you to select that template that I mentioned. You need a template here with respect to resubscribe. So again, scroll back to the top, choose the template you want, and then it allows you to set up what the resubscribe prompt looks like on your forms. So this is what you have to do to enable prospect resubscribe in Pardot, and then you would save your account to enable that feature. Okay, so that's where to enable it. Now let's talk about what happens when it actually fires. So when resubscribe is enabled, if someone starts to fill out a Pardot form, so this is a Pardot form on a landing page, or it's a Pardot form you've embedded in your website, and they've previously unsubscribed, okay, and they're cookied, their email is going to be auto-populated in here, and this little message is going to pop up. It says it looks like you previously unsubscribed, click to resubscribe, and we'll send an email with a link. That's that email we were talking about. So if they click that link, essentially that sends an email outside of the context of the form. It actually shows up in their prospect history as an activity, and that gives them the opportunity to resubscribe. They can still fill out this form as before, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything with respect to the resubscribe unless they click that link. So this works fine if you are using Pardot forms. But what happens if you're not? What happens if you're using form handlers or operational emails? This doesn't show up. So how do you tell your prospects who've opted out, if they fill out something and get an autoresponder, for example, that they've unsubscribed from email, and would they like to opt back in? So here's a workaround to use when you're using form handlers or if you're using operational emails. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create an automation recipe to mark people for when they opt out, because opted out actually is not a merge tag that you can use. So you have to create one that defines someone who's opted out. So essentially this recipe says it's an automation rule. When the prospect email status is opted out, create a custom field that is a prospect custom field called opted out or opted out switch or something like that. Set it to yes. This is an example, like we mentioned before, of a field where if you use this as a checkbox or something, you don't want to merge this, or you don't want to sync this with Salesforce. But in any event, I created it as a text field because all I have to do is say yes, they opted out, or no, or clear the field essentially. So this is creating a merge tag that we can use to identify people who've opted out for the purposes of creating that resubscribe link. So when, for example, you're sending an autoresponder to an email or to a form that's been filled out or a form handler, and they've opted out, then if you've got this opted out switch set, you can then show the message that says, hey, you've opted out, click here to resubscribe, use that resubscribe link, else nothing, and if. So essentially, it only shows if the person has unsubscribed, gives them that option to resubscribe. So this is a nice way to do it. Now remember, this doesn't work if you're using it in Engagement Studio, because you're not going to get into an Engagement Studio if you are opted out. So it only is going to work if you've got an autoresponder as the completion action for a form handler. So that's the only way it's going to actually work. So you can also, of course, create that resubscribe link as just a link behind the text by using the link type. And look at that, there's a resubscribe link available now as one of the link options for this. And of course, the merge tag for this is handlebars resubscribe, close handlebars. So that's how you would add that resubscribe option to your autoresponder email. Now, this is another really important tip. Once populated, Pardot does not want to give up data. Pardot really, really is good at accumulating data, as a friend of mine often says. So it's very difficult to get Pardot to clear data. You can't, in fact, even import a blank field to overwrite. It won't let you overwrite a field with blank data. So you have to run an automation rule to clear the that opted out switch when they opt back in. So you need to create an automation recipe to clear those fields when they opt back in, so that they don't see that resubscribe option if they go through another one of your form handlers and get that auto reply. So this is the automation recipe for how to clear those fields when they opt back in. Essentially, if they're opted out and they're not opted, if their switch is set to they're opted out, but the status isn't opted out, then clear the field. So that's how you clear that field, get rid of that data so it's back to blank. All right, here's cool HML trick number 2. Essentially showing HTML links or not. So we have people who might want to show people a list of links depending on, let's say, what products they own. So you can use a full URL as the product name in an ownership field. So, for example, if they own a certain product, put the full URL for, let's say, the product documentation as the HML value in there, so that if they own the product, show this field. If not, don't show it. And you can have multiple fields. Let's say you have 4 products in your portfolio. Show them these links if they happen to own the product, and don't show them if they don't. If they own the product, then the link shows. If they don't, it's blank. So that's the other tip, is that the else option can be blank. Just don't show anything if you don't have that field populated. So here's another tip with using HML to render the full link. So you have 2 options here. You can just have the full link as the value in that text field, and it will render as the full text link. Now, if you use it that way, then Pardot's not going to rewrite the URL. It's going to just render the straight up link for you. Now, that might be good if you really aren't interested in tracking those links. Maybe it is product documentation and you don't care. So if you render the full link with the HTTP in it in your field, it's going to just present that, and using that protocol other here, if you're creating a link where it says product 1 document, let's say we don't want to show the full link itself. We want to say, here is the document, the user manual for this product. Then when you're creating that link, use the protocol other, and then just use your field value as the URL. So recipient product 1. Okay. So this is how you would render that as a non-tracked link. Now let's say you do want to track it, so you would treat that one differently. If you do want to track it, then you don't render the full link. You just render the part after the HTTPS : / just render that part as your value in that field and use that protocol, and then again use that merge tag as the URL. This will render a tracked link in Pardot if you want to track what's being clicked. So that's a way to do it either or a method, but using a URL as the field value, showing it or not showing it. Now here's cool trick number 3, using Handlebar merge to show alternative custom redirects. So you can use this method to show different custom redirects depending on whether a condition exists or not. So for example, if condition 1 exists, you can show custom redirect number 1, and you can set completion actions on that custom redirect, of course. Or if they don't meet the condition, show some different custom redirect so that different actions can be set. So it came up in the presentation, what's a use case for this? So I'm going to show you 2 right now. So the first one is, what if you wanted to create a Net Promoter Score in Pardot as an option for getting customer feedback? Now I have a completely separate blog post and instruction video on how to create an NPS survey in Pardot and Salesforce with no additional software at all, and I'll put the link to that in this blog post. So this uses that methodology. This example uses that methodology for showing an NPS score. So if the prospect has no NPS score, they've never answered the question before, show the NPS question. Would you recommend us to a friend or a colleague? Each one of those numbers is a different custom redirect, which defines that they scored us a 3, they scored us a 6, they scored us a 10, and it has individual completion actions on each one of them. Else, okay, so let's say else we do have an NPS score. Maybe we want to ask something else. Maybe we want to give them the opportunity to change their answer. I've given this example of, you rated our service A 10 last time. Would you like to change your rating? Click here. That takes you to another NPS survey for follow-up. So that's an option of, if we don't, if we don't have the score, ask the NPS question. If we do have an NPS score, maybe we want to ask something slightly different. So that's riff number 1. Riff number 2 would be using custom redirects instead of dynamic content. This was another question that came up in the session, and it was essentially maybe you don't have dynamic content because you don't have that level of Pardot account, or the question had to do with, I want to be able to track what links were clicked, but that's not so easy with dynamic content. Well, it is if you used a custom redirect in dynamic content, but here is another way to do it. So it's another option, and it's essentially, let's say you have 4 different industries and you want to show different links based on different industries. So you would have a different custom field that defines what the recipient's industry is. If that is yes, show this industry link. Now, by inference, the other ones would be blank. So you'd be showing essentially one of these 4 options here and not any of the others. So just fair warning, be really careful that people don't get into multiple industries unless that makes sense for your use case. Now, in this case, I also put one last else option, which is making sure that if all of these happen to be blank, that something shows up here. And maybe it's the industry unknown link that we have here. But if you use custom redirects for this, then it allows us to define what was clicked, and allows you to track that inside of the email. So that's a second riff on that option of using different dynamic links depending on what the answer is. All right, so here's trick number 4, using Handlebar merge to populate a custom URL. So let's go back to the example of, we have that recipient owner name, whoever owns the record, your sales rep is, here's their information from Salesforce. Now, I've added a different option here, which is, would you like to schedule a call with me? Maybe it's maybe you're trying to use this as an opportunity for your salespeople to reach out. So, would you like to schedule a call? Click here. So now we're going to use Handlebar merge to populate the parameters of that URL under the click here link. So let's say you're using Calendly. This is a great example. I've used this with Pardot before. Calendly accepts parameterized variables inside of its link. Now, these don't even show up in Calendly until like the 2nd or 3rd screen, so it's really cool because you can start, you pick your time, and then it actually will pre-fill the information in the Calendly link for you. So let's say your Calendly.com has a identification inside of the link that is the recipient owner's name. So, Joe Smith. So if that is parameterized inside of the Calendly link, I can actually parameterize that right inside of Pardot so that all of my sales reps have their Calendly parameter as a variable, so that I can pre-fill this based on who the link, whose calendar it is. And then the meeting type, now everything after the question mark is all your parameters from Pardot, variables according to the prospect. So the name is the recipient.first name, and then you have this #20, which specifies a space, and then recipient last name, and then the ampersand, and then the email address. So this fills in what's basically the standard Calendly calendar option, which is the first name and the last name in the same field, and then the email address. Now, you can get very clever with this. You can create different field names in Calendly as well. These are the standard ones, though: first underscore name, last underscore name, guest and location, as well as that name and email. Those are the standard ones in Calendly, but you can create options, and Calendly does have some documentation on how this works to parameterize a calendar invitation link. So that's very nice, low friction for your prospect, where all I have to do is click the link, pick a time, it fills in everything else according to what's in their Pardot record, and they schedule the the meeting. All right, riff number 2 on this one is pre-populate a custom URL link, but only if the prospect is a customer. So let's say you've got a field in Pardot which defines what their customer ID is, and you have a system which has their customer ID as part of a parameterized URL. So in this case, if the recipient is a customer, give them a link which incorporates the customer ID into the URL, and then maybe you've got an email on that field as well that you can pre-fill using that variable with the question mark. And that would give them that link with this link to your maybe it's your custom login system, maybe it's their customer account, whatever that is. Else, some other link because they're not a customer. So if this customer ID is blank, then don't show them the customer login page, show them something else, show them nothing, whatever you want. But this is a way to parameterize that and then show it if they're a customer only, and if not, show them something else. All right, trick number 5. Using Handlebar merge to populate a form handler. Now, a lot of people were really blown away by this one because it's using form handlers in very unconventional ways. So I'll take it slowly so I'm very clear on how this works. So what the setup for this is, you always have to be a little careful about what you create as custom fields in Pardot. And my favorite example of do you really want to create a custom field for that is what's your t-shirt size, and do you want a vegan or gluten-free lunch when you're doing some kind of an event registration or something with Pardot. You may not want to store somebody's t-shirt size and whether they wanted a vegan lunch for an event 2 years ago permanently in your Pardot database. So how do we get around that? What do we do instead, and how do we use that? So we're going to combine a lot of the techniques that we talked about already into a master riff on all these techniques and using a form handler. So a form handler can be used as a link in any email as an alternative for making someone fill out another form. Okay? A form handler is actually just a parameterized URL. You can use it like any other link. So here's an example for to say if I'm sending an email because I know the recipient is attending some specific event, I can have three custom links in the email to define whether they want a medium shirt, a large shirt, or an extra large shirt, for example. I'm parameterizing the URL, and I'm actually filling in, this is the pink stuff here, into the comments field. I'm filling in the recipient is attending some specific event and %20, which means space, large space shirt. So I'm putting that in the comments. I'm not putting it in a field at all, but I'm actually using a form handler to fill out this information and stuff it into the comments field. So I can repeat that thing with medium, large, and extra large, and just change the information that I'm writing into the link. Notice I'm not using a field here. I'm just using the words large shirt. I don't care about creating a field for these or even creating anything else. I'm just putting it in an email and I'm sending this information into the comment field. So Riff 2, building off of this, is a form handler can be used as a way to copy information from one field to another, to concatenate data, and to add additional notes. So the one thing I want you to realize here with form handlers is, in form handlers, you can, as long as the field is not required, you can put any information into the form handler in any order you want, and you can submit to the same field more than once if you want to. So sometimes you might want to submit the same information in a form handler to the comments field more than once. You can do that. That's perfectly fine. So in this example, I'm concatenating the data from the form handler into the comments field. So I'm concatenating something that is just, in this case, this is an important note with the recipient custom field 1, custom field 3, recipient custom 1, and a %2C, which is a comma, and recipient custom field 3. So I'm combining a bunch of information from that form into the comments field without putting it in any other field at all. Or I can put it in a field and in the comments field. It doesn't really matter. So you can combine these pieces of information into a single field if you want to do that. Or you can use the form handler to submit multiple times to the same field. So a couple of tricks that are useful here, and I've mentioned them already a little bit, is the URL UTF-8 encoding. So you can't just put in a space in a URL because that wouldn't work. So here are 4 really handy ones. %0A is a new line, so that helps organize information if you're putting in comments, particularly multiple pieces of information into there. It organizes it really nice into your comments field for Salesforce. %20 is a space. %3A is a colon. %2C is a comma. And there's a whole recipe of how to encode different characters into a URL that you can use. So this is the format that you use, and you can build those URLs with a combination of merge tags and just plain old text if you wanted to put multiple pieces of information into a single field when you're submitting that form handler. And Riff 3 is essentially repeating Riff 2 with a form handler, but using JavaScript in the thank you code. So this would be using a Pardot form and then JavaScript as in the thank you code to pull all the information that was just submitted out of that form and resubmit it into a form handler. This again is a way to get around the fact that you can't double submit to the same form at the same time. You might want to combine information from a couple of fields into the comments. Use JavaScript in the thank you code of the Pardot form to do that. Again, this only works in a Pardot form, but then essentially the Pardot form is submitting using the JavaScript to the form handler as a second action. So we covered a lot of things in this session, but a few final thoughts from me. One of them is, another question that came up was, can we do a nested if statement? Can you nest an if within an if? No, you cannot. Hopefully Salesforce was watching that presentation from before, or they're watching this one, and they'll think about including that in a future release. That would be helpful if we could nest an if statement inside of another statement. The other thing I want to make sure, please, 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 when you're doing this kind of thing, test everything. Never, ever, ever, ever implement something like this without thorough testing, or else unintended consequences always result. Make sure you test every variation that you can think of to make sure that this has the very behavior that you are intending for it to have. And that's all for me. I'd like to thank you for listening to my presentation on Handlebar Merge. And just remember, Handlebar Merge are just a sideways bow tie. Thank you from Bill Fetter, Unfettered Marketing, LLC. Have a good day.